Welcome to the Growth Whisperers, where we talk about how to build enduring great teams every week. I'm Brad Giles, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Kevin Lawrence. Kevin, how are you doing today?
Brad, I'm doing awesome. I'm doing really well. What's interesting, we're kind of moving through all this crazy virus stuff that we've had and had a great weekend with my son getting away for a little bit and some great stuff with clients. So I'm ready for a break. Looking forward to some time over our summer, which is coming up. But I'm feeling really good, really good.
Excellent. Great to hear. Great to hear. Well, we've got some interesting things to talk about today. Tell me, what do we got on today?
Yeah, today we're going to talk about being human and what humanness can we be accepting from our people, and then what humanness is actually probably not cool or not acceptable. So, going to call it, we are all human is kind of what we're looking at a bit today. And then we're going to talk about how do you effectively plan in these times? Like, how do you plan for scenarios where there's a lot of unknowns in terms of what's going on? So we got some stuff about some different scenario planning and a couple of creative ideas to help people to think more effectively when they're in the middle of the clouds or a little bit of a fog in some cases, where either you're in denial because you think you know the answer, or if you're paying attention, you know that you don't know the answer. But we got some ideas to help with that thinking.
Awesome. That's interesting. So let's get into it. So first of all, we're all human. That's intriguing. And how does that relate to building enduring great companies? Like, we're all human. Tell me about that.
Well, they're full of humans. and as one CEO I was talking with today was going, in the CEO group they're part of, we're all still looking for that magical business that has no humans, i.e. no employees, no customers, but makes a lot of money. And it's just not possible. But the human interactions are things that create a lot of joy and a lot of friction. So it comes down to the kind of, like, what are the things that are acceptable? And Brad, you had a story that you picked up on this week about a human in a very important role that made almost a comical oopsie.
No. I've got to call time out on that and go rewind. I'll come back to that story. I read an article it was an old one from Clayton Christensen.
Yep.
And he summarized it as being, people go into business thinking it's all about the deals. And some people continue to be always motivated by the deals and the transactions. Yep. But then a lot of people, they come to realize that the real joy is building a great team. The real joy comes from helping people to grow to become the best versions of themselves. So yes. I can't help but immediately push back on the concept that, a lot of CEOs say, which is, ideally, there'd be a factory with no people, except for maybe one person, and that person's job is to feed the dog, and the dog's job is to watch the person. There's no people at all. Like, the great joy in businesses comes from leadership and helping leaders become the best version of themselves, and watching and enjoying and being a part of that journey. So thank you for accepting my time on that rant there.
But it is true, Brad, because that's where the intrinsic reward comes from. A lot of people seeing people grow. That's what the level 5 leaders that Collins found in his research are about. They are excited about seeing other people succeed and achieve things. It's not just about them. It's not just about making money. That's kind of soulless anyways. But that, for the best people, they are excited about that and seeing people grow and thrive. And at some point, because you're surrounded by people all day long, it's one of the greatest paths to sanity, is to see these capable people become more capable and achieve more, much like being a great parent.
I couldn't agree more. I just don't really, I feel compelled to push back when people talk about this idea that, we don't want to have any, we don't want to have any people. We want to have just the CEO, and it's just a money making machine. If that's the case, go and invest in stocks and don't look,
or buy property and talk to your customer once a year.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and the challenge is, and why do you think that happens? Like, why does some people end up in businesses and running businesses and they can't stand people, or they don't enjoy the people part of the business and it becomes like the bane of their existence?
So a person either starts a business or gets a job as a leader. Now, when they start that, my thought is they look back and they go, you know what, I didn't like that other boss. When I become a boss, I'm not going to be like them. I'm going to be
For sure.
kinder, or I'm going to let people, do the right thing. I'm not going to be mean or hard, or I'm not going to call people out. And they go in with this idea of who they're going to be. And so what then happens is they let little situations fester. Something really small gets on their nerves, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, I'm a liberal, or I'm a liberated, or I'm a generous boss, or whatever it might be." So they let these little things kind of begin to happen, and then they happen a little bit more, and then underneath the surface, the CEO's getting a little bit annoyed. Like, well, you shouldn't really be doing that, as normal people would. The little things turn into big things, and then eventually the CEO will have a rage, a blow up.
Yeah.
They'll get upset. So yeah, I think that through that journey, they start off thinking, well, I don't want to be like the old boss, and then they therefore don't hold people accountable. They don't set the right metrics. They don't set the right
Yeah.
expectations. And for the team, they're really learning on the job. And then because they get disappointed, because if you were on the other side of that, you're thinking, well, this boss doesn't really care if I make a mistake, or whatever it might be. And then you move on to the next
It's
sort
like
of
they're
phase.
overcompensating almost, is what you're saying. Like they're swinging too far the other way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. So they don't want to be like the boss that they experienced as a
Yeah.
subordinate. They come into the role, okay, and in that role, then they're trying to be something else. But then really what they're doing is they're not holding people accountable. They're not creating a culture of accountability. And
Yeah.
then from there, what happens is they get disappointed by people who let them down. And then they think, well, I don't want to. So everyone lets me down. I don't want to have employees.
When
How
they're
can I not
actually
have,
the problem.
when
And
they're
they start
actually
to
the
think it's
problem?
bad people, but they're often the problem. I call it the muddy boots scenario. If I show up at the front door of your house, which I haven't been to yet, hopefully I will one day, and I'm wearing muddy boots, most people are going to ask me to remove them if I start to walk through your house. But what happens with a lot of these people is they got people with muddy boots and cow pies on the bottom, or kangaroo pies in your part of the world, traipsing through their house at a party, and everyone's destroying their floors and everything, and they're not saying nothing because they want to be a nice person. Yeah, but yet if we actually did have muddy boots, they'd probably stop them. But in the role of a leader, they're confused, and they actually don't have a good role model for what it should be like. And then you're right, they put up with all this stuff and get frustrated. Well, of course the people are wearing muddy boots because you haven't
Yep.
led them or told them otherwise.
You haven't held them
Or you
accountable.
wait till the end and you have a temper tantrum on your people, and then you wonder why they lose respect for you or why they don't follow you.
So if I follow that analogy, what I'm saying is that the person who owns the house is saying, you know what, my dad always yelled at me when I had muddy boots in the house. I'm just going to let people, I'm not going to yell at people. And then
I'll let
what
people wear
happens?
boots in my house. Whatever they want to wear in my house is good, right?
It's good.
Because that's when their own issues are in the way. They still got issues with their dad. Like, go see a therapist. Clean up your issues with your dad that are causing you to swing over to be Mr. Super nicest guy on the planet or Miss nicest person on the planet.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot. And this is where there's this thing called growth and learning how to be a more effective leader. And we see it all the time.
Yep.
Where people, and by the way, all this leadership stuff can be learned. It's all learnable. But people don't have the perspective or understanding. And that's why, one of my favorite books, I recommended it again last night. One of my buddies from high school was out from Toronto, and I caught up with him and his brother.
Yep.
And his brother is really successful coach in soccer, English style football. And so we got talking, and my favorite book was called Multipliers by Liz Moisman around leadership.
Oh, yeah.
It's a brilliant model because there's leaders who are trying, when you're trying to be Mr. and Miss Nice Guy, you're usually in trouble.
Uh-huh.
you're not going to make the right leadership moves. But in multipliers, Liz Weissman, the author, is awesome. I got to spend some time with her. She's awesome human and great book and model. But there's people who multiply people's intelligence and capability, basically
Uh-huh.
make their team stronger. And
Yeah.
there's those who inadvertently, by trying to do something that feels right, actually minimize people's capability, making them weaker or less effective. But that's a learned skill. It's instead of going left, you go right and you get more effective. And if you notice, many of these people who hate working with people, generally, they have a lot more diminishing tendencies because they haven't had the right training yet. They haven't learned. And a lot of the leaders we work with, we train people on that method and help them grow and to be more like multipliers. And then shockingly, they enjoy their job better because they got a better team.
Well, two things. Number one, we don't stand in kangaroo pies, we eat them. Number two, yeah, I think in my observation, I think it's a thing that most leaders go through, and I absolutely agree.
Mhm.
And I've even used a quote from Jim Collins about you can learn to be a great leader. Like I think that you need to have some base traits, but leadership is something that is learned. And it's kind of unlike many other professions. You wouldn't have a person their first day on a job as a doctor let loose to go and do a whole range of things, or a carpenter or whatever. It's all involves a whole range of training that many times doesn't really happen. People ascend, let's say, the organizational chart, and they've got to learn on the job.
It's like, hey, Johnny's really amazing. We've got a hole here. We need some help. Let's put Johnny in that role, or Jackie. And they've never led a team in their life, right? They may not even have had a great manager. So often we push people into those positions where they fail.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some of them may not have the wiring or the desire. That can be.
Yeah.
But for some, it's just not the right training. And we got a wonderful guy in one of the companies that we work with. We're dealing with this right now. He's awesome. He knows his discipline in the business. But he's now in a situation where he's working with some senior leaders on very strategic projects. He just doesn't have the exposure nor the skill set to do that.
Yeah.
Or no different than when a company is private equity backed and they have a CFO who doesn't have a lot of experience dealing with a real board.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like it's if you haven't seen it and been exposed to it, it's hard. That's why private equity backed companies often go and get CFOs that are already worked at a private equity backed company. It's a critical role, but they've already seen it and done it and learned how that system works. No different than learning leadership. So it's fascinating, and it's why we scrutinize so deeply the people we hire and promote, because we don't want to put people somewhere where they're going to fail. And all too often we get amazing people who are great at their role, and you put them into these leadership jobs and they fall on their face. And that I think that's our fault, because we didn't train them properly or make sure that they had a chance of winning.
And part of that dynamic is tough, though, because if you were friends with and alongside peers, and then you're promoted, and then you need to begin to hold those peers accountable and to set standards, it can be really, it's a tough situation for anyone. And it happens every day all around the world, right? And there isn't really kind of a model to follow, I think, other than for many people just jump into it.
Well, there are lots of models. People just don't get taught them.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the models in 1 Minute Manager, it's one of my favorite management books. If Multipliers is learning to be more effective as a leader, more leadership skills, 1 Minute Manager, it basically says, here's how you be a manager. Understand your people, have them set clear goals. And when they achieve it, give them a little pat on the back and set more. And when they don't, go back and re-clarify and figure, were we not clear? What went wrong? How do we do it? Sometimes a bit of giving them some tough feedback, and then go back and reset the goals. And at the end of the day, and if they fall on their face again, you might have to change your tactic further. And if they achieve it, then you give them a pat on the back and go and set some more goals. So there's models like 1 Minute Manager and multipliers and and goal setting programs like we would use in scaling up and other things like that.
Yeah.
They're not rocket science. They're just not common.
Yeah, it's pretty close to my heart. I wrote a book. In that book, chapter 1 is about accountability. There's only 5 chapters. Like
Right.
I'm a big believer in it. I think it's so important. So maybe we should move on. We've now spent 15
So
minutes.
the point that we
topic.
wanted to share, the last thing, and the point one is to get on that, Brad. We got a little bit excited about that, which is fun. But we were talking about this thing, and you talked about there where it's fair bump, play on, like and you might want to explain that, and we can talk about some scenarios just for me for a minute about a couple scenarios where we might have that in our mind, or we call it a mulligan, like in golf, you get a kind of a free shot or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So a bit of context. In Australia, if I was to say to someone overseas, what do you think is the Australian game involving a ball? You'd probably say rugby. And it's probably not the case. The most successful game is a game called Australian rules football. It's not like specifically any other game, but it's a ball. There's, I guess, 25 people or whatever running around the field, and they're trying to kick goals. Pretty simple concept, but it's quite like Australians. It's quite a rough game. A lot of Americans come over and they're surprised at how rough it is. A lot of jumping, a lot of sprinting, and kicking. Within that, there's kind of a line in the sand. As I said, it's a rough game. There's kind of a line in the sand whereby it's fair enough to run up to someone and use your body weight to kind of bump into them, right? And to push them over with your body rather than your hand, or to, fully use the weight of your body to put them off balance. Not to necessarily injure them, but everybody kind of has a bit of a sense of where is the line in the sand. And that kind of phrase, which is pretty common in Australian language, is fair bump, play on. So that would be said by the umpire in a footy match. It's fair. Like you've knocked the person over. You've really kind of knocked the wind out of them, but it was fair. It was not malicious. You didn't send them off to hospital. It's okay. It's fair. Let's move on. So within that context, and I don't think I've heard the phrase mulligan before, but I understand it's the same kind of thing. Is that right?
It is. It's just basically you get a free pass. Like, hey, it's like a teacher letting you rewrite a test. You get a free pass. It's like, hey, we understand. We're not going to hold it against you. Let's move on.
And now let's look at what's happened with people. The heading is we're all human, right? What's happened with people? This is, once in 100-year type event for people.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Let's hope. You're done right there. For people and their families and companies. And, everyone is different. So I suppose, things happen and it's okay. We're all human. People react in different ways. We're not robots. We're organic beings. And you and I are both hard. Am I allowed to say hard asses?
That would be appropriate. Yes.
Okay. We're both hard. I mean, in terms of, potentially a swear word, nonetheless, we're both hard asses when it comes to A players. Okay. So, if you want to build a great team, rule number one, if you want to build a great business, you've got to have a great team. It's
period.
And then coming back to what's the quality of the people. But in this environment, people have been affected in different ways. People, they might have their own health issues. They might have their own concerns. Things have been really different. Maybe they've got economic challenges. A lot of companies have said 20% pay cuts or 30% pay cuts. And maybe that's causing them huge amounts of stress because of their debt load, or anything's happening, and so many things are happening at once. And when we think about the concept of the mulligan or fair bump, play on, I think, I don't know, the story for me is I was in a workshop yesterday with a team, and we were assessing the company, the key people in the company, and we were saying, how are they rating? And what we do a lot of the time is we say, how are they rating against our culture or our core values? And how are we rating them against their productivity, how they perform in the role? And so we were doing a lot of that kind of work with the team. We'd map them out. And before that as well, during the day, there was a lot of talk about people who were doing things that were a bit weird. People were doing things that are a bit out of character. And you could feel the momentum building in the room because, as I said earlier, we operate a hard-ass model whereby we've got to have A players to build a great business.
Yep.
You feel the momentum building. And so I kind of had to stop and think, we're all human here. Like, sometimes I think that we've got to give people a free pass. Sometimes I think it's important to say, yeah, we're building a great company. I think we are able to let people, we're able to let people go. We're not dismiss them, but let them get away with something in this environment,
Right.
because it's so unusual.
It's like there's a wider tolerance in what we're going through.
Yeah.
In normal times, if some of these, we'll call it weird behaviors or people mentally faded, and in a world that I work in, we do a lot of, just talk around mental health, and as you do as well. And if mentally they've kind of slipped into what we would look at the orange or the red zone on the mental health continuum, like they might need to take some time off, right?
Yeah.
They might need to have some shorter days, 4-day weeks, or time to kind of recover or pass off some projects to lighten their load. So we would look at, no matter what, when people have mental health issues, we generally want to cut them some slack. If they have a medical issue, we would cut them some slack. But in an environment like this, some people just don't do well in this kind of chaos and stress. And some people, we've seen executives that have got burnt out and need a bit more time. We've seen people have had some outbursts, and done some silly things. People have made some really big mistakes. So, I think what you're sharing is that there's, in many cases, there's a greater tolerance, and we need to cut people some slack. And I remember there's a guy in the U.S. owned a chain of stores called the Men's Warehouse, and he had a policy where he would actually hire people that had been in jail, and if someone stole from him, he wouldn't fire them. He would, for a lot of companies, theft, that's it.
Yeah.
But for him, he's like, you know what? They'll talk to the guy or the girl, and they give him he was known for giving people a second chance.
But there was consequences, right? There was some kind of consequence, surely.
Probably. It's compassion and consequence, I believe.
Yeah.
And the same with in this situation. People need to understand that they need to find a way to perform, and get themselves back up, right? If someone mentally kind of breaks down or physically breaks down and they can't get back to work at some point, that's going to affect their job. They might have to go to part-time, or they might not be able to keep their responsibilities. But I think there's a case to be made, like you're saying, to give people some extra space in some cases.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, if you want to be a senior executive and, a VP, an SVP, something in the C-suite, you need to be able to find a way and resources to push through the hardest times. And there's certain people that have that kind of resilience.
Yeah.
And if you look at the best executives we work with, they find a way. And then they'll find a way to recover. They learn how to take care of themselves. But they generally find a way, because for some CEOs, when one of their key people drops in the middle of something like this, it's concerning. Because it's kind of like having a player on your team and it's crunch time at the end of the final minutes of whatever championship game you're in, and then they mentally fade.
Yeah.
And it happens, and you start to see things like so one is becoming aware of it. Sometimes you can grow through it, as you and I talked about before. And sometimes people just get a pass because it was just a weird glitch that happened.
Yeah, it's a spectrum, right? It's not digital. We've just got to be considerate of it. A quick example, going back into the tough times where fear, uncertainty, and doubt were ruling the roost, let's say, of the pandemic. I remember speaking to one of the CEOs that I work with, and I said, "How are you going?" He said, "Look, I'm good. He said, I think I was kind of built for this time. I think that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I said, I'm exactly the same. Like, this is where I do my best work is in this type of circumstance. And we kind of spoke about it a bit further. And then I said, how are we going to manage our next leadership team offsite? How are we going to work through that? And he said, I think that they can't handle it. He said, I think that I can, and I know that you can, Brad. But I said, I think that what we've got to do is give them the priorities to work through, and then they can't deal with all of the things that are going on right now. We've just got to keep them focused. Now, they're a good team, don't get me wrong, but it's a spectrum. Like, the way that we deal with it is okay. So I don't think that he necessarily gave them a free pass, but he just assessed the situation, realized in that circumstance just how much different he was than the members of the leadership team.
Yep.
And in terms of how can we be the most effective at this point, that was the answer.
And there's a whole other discussion around this, around Enneagrams, which is a personality assessment and personality style that we use a lot. And it describes it because of my Enneagram is something called an 8. I am wired in the toughest times to rise up, build, and find more energy and do whatever it takes in crunch times. That's how I'm wired. It's like I won't back down. But there's certain types of people who play. It's almost like different roles in a sport. Different personality types have different responses to different situations. And it's not only this is a personality type, also based on their experience and other things they've done. So it's all fascinating. The key is we got to remember everyone's human and cut people some slack where it's appropriate. But some other times we might need to make some tough calls or changes if it's something that you just don't give someone a mulligan for. So now we just transition to planning, kind of what we talked about. We kind of touched on a little bit there, but different scenarios, people have to be able to adapt more than ever as we've experienced, and hopefully it settles down a little more. But how do we effectively plan in this world of uncertainty? And there's lots of different things going on. And we were talking earlier about a kind of a creative context you'd found in an article. You want to share that article? That there's a couple quotes from an article that'll kind of set up one kind of train of thinking.
Yeah. So this was an excerpt from the Australian Financial Review, one of the more respected business newspapers over here in Australia. And it was a board member of the Reserve Bank, who was talking about the current environment. And what he said is, a vaccine has never been discovered for any previous type of coronavirus. Okay. Point 2. Then he went on to say that if there is no vaccine, the economy could become totally different, because the continuing need for social distancing rules will permanently upend industries such as aviation, tourism, and large-scale entertainment. And I just found that really interesting. I think so much of what we've been looking at in this environment is thinking, this is bad, this will pass, and then we will go on.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to pivot our business model. We need to get through it. But I suppose more than that, it gets us to ask the question, well, what if there is no vaccine? There's never been one before. And fingers crossed, the capable scientists who are smarter than you and I are able to come up with a vaccine. But again, for context, it's never been done before for a coronavirus.
And there's more resources being thrown at it before than ever. Before it was more, there was the flus that were happening in Asia and things like that. So the chances are more than ever. But I like the question because it sets up proper scenario planning. Like, we want to be optimistic, but at the same time, we need to be realistic. And that question really, if you really consider it for your business, what happens if there isn't a vaccine? What happens if it comes back in the fall, where people become even more afraid of this darn thing, and we're hoping that doesn't happen. We want to be optimistic, but if it does, and if there isn't a vaccine, then what? how does your business thrive? And, I love challenging questions that take our mind out of our logical linear thinking and help us be
Yeah.
really creative and really strategic. So that would be a spectacular conversation to have a team, or whether it's a breakouts and one team focuses on that, or your whole team. Like, what if this is reality? And I'm exaggerating for the point I'm not predicting, but for the next 10 years.
I think you're predicting.
Yeah. No, I do not. I wouldn't want to give that energy. I don't even like saying it. But the point of it is so
Yeah.
what would we do if that were the case? And that'll create some damn good creative ideas. Like that would be another one that, you and I have also talked about, Brad, which is, if we were our competition, how would we take us out? We've done that in strat planning sessions for one of our clients. On an annual planning meeting, we usually get way deeper on strategy. But if we were our competition,
explain what you mean by that. Just draw that out a bit. Expand on that a little bit. What you mean by that?
Absolutely. So, when you're in a strategic planning session, people have their thinking, and we'll take a little look at the competitors and see what they're doing. We'll look at our strategy and kind of decide the moves we're going to make. But often companies decide the moves they're going to make from inside their own little bubble, right? Those little snow globes that you shake up that's got the picture of the Swiss town or whatever it is. We're inside our own little snow globe, and hey, it's all looking pretty good. But you got to be like the cat that's trying to get the bird in the cage thinking, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be, imagine, there's a bird inside that, and the cat is trying to kill it and have some lunch.
Yeah.
Well, you got to, if you put that brain on, when you're inside your little bubble, you don't have that brain. You're thinking about how do we optimize and do better and get some new customers. But when you put that relentless thinking hat, the sly hat of the external trying to destroy you, you have a whole different set of thoughts.
Okay, so if we were Tesla, what you're saying is, and we were on the Tesla leadership team, we'd be saying, how would Ford try to take us out? What would Ford do? Let's pretend that we're the Ford leadership team. How would you attack the Tesla?
And you'd have a group. Team? You got the Ford leadership team, but then you would need to have the Apple leadership team, because they're more likely to be, right. And then you would have the Freightliner trucks leadership team for the big industrial machinery. And then you would think of a few other people, and from those perspectives, how would they seek you out and destroy you or take your customers?
Yeah.
It's a very powerful exercise. So these are, questions and scenarios to help improve our thinking, more than just what happens if the market's up 10%? What happens if the market doesn't go up 10%? I mean, it's fine.
The good thing I like about it there is that so often you and I would be in a situation with a leadership team, and they just come up with BS. So you say, all right, so who's the best at making these widgets? And they'll say,
no, we're the best. We got this covered. The competition, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Except for it's the salespeople. If it's the salespeople negotiating their sales budget, then the competition's real tough.
But I don't know about you, but I just stand there, and I suppose this is the benefit of having an external leadership advisor in the room. And I'm like, really? Like, wouldn't we be saying the same thing if we were the competition? Like,
damn rights.
I just don't. You've got to kind of call it out and say, well, I don't think that this is really.
Well, you model it out, Brad. Other things we've done is we've taken, from Blue Ocean Strategy, and we do the strategy map of our competition versus us. And sometimes a good group will start to see gaps. Customer feedback. We will do benchmark studies of how we rate. In one of our clients, we did some pretty serious research about benchmarking the competition in terms of, we would do customer satisfaction surveys, but we would call our customers, and then we would call the competition's customers. Yeah. And we wouldn't tell them who was calling. So we would then be able to rank ourselves against our biggest competitors on multiple things to get that data. But one of the best ones, recently, I was in one of those meetings. Oh, the competition, no one's got what we got. And I'm like, okay. So one of the guys on the team started to do a real competitive analysis. It wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
Like, we had a competitor, and so we're at the meeting providing the research, and the head strategic officer of the company has a lot of pride. He's a founder, and our product is, blah, 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 blah. So, it's the best. And sounded pretty good to me. And so when we're going through the presentation of the findings with on the competition, I look over at the head strategic officer, and he's not looking at me because there's some damn good competition. Heck, there's some competition that are making almost all the claims that we were making. And they were a couple years ahead of us, but we were running it like we were the only game in town. So there's this, you want to have the belief and the confidence, but the reality check of the reality, super powerful. And so all of that stuff, it gives us a bit of a shake. And then it helps us to go back to, okay, now what do we really need to be able to do to succeed? Right. And it keeps us from getting complacent, thinking we're the best game in town. And it's just, it's really, really dangerous. So those are a couple, there's many more that you probably use and I use in planning scenarios.
Yeah.
To really shake up our thinking. But it's interesting. One other company that we started working with, the CEO was saying that he had a real serious complaint from one of their longest term customers.
Yeah.
And I said to the CEO, it sounds like you guys are kind of mediocre. He's like, yeah, it's crazy. I said, well, what does your customer sat data tell you? And he's like, huh?
What?
So
what do you mean?
Well, you have, you're an amazing company. You've got customer satisfaction data, so you see what's working, what's not. And he's like, and he starts to look a little embarrassed and sheepish.
Yeah.
He doesn't. So they don't have any pulse to kind of keep it real. So anyway, if we go back to the point about what are these compelling questions and scenarios you can consider to help your planning? Like I have in my new book that's coming up and been working on it. One of the things I just talked about is a different take on scenario planning, and people always have what we call plan Bs. Here's our plan, but plan B is what we do if it doesn't go well. And I thought about that, and in this kind of market, that's not the right thinking. That's only we've got a more conservative stance, but we need to have a more aggressive stance too. And I just call it ABCs, and I got it written down here because I'm still developing this. But I look at your main budget, which is a B in it, is your baseline plan, budget or baseline plan.
So that might be last year plus 5% or something like that. Is that right?
Exactly. What you think is quite doable, right? And hopefully it's more vibrant. Say again?
What the accountants might have sent us. No,
exactly. That's what the accountants might have sent us. And you would negotiate that to actually what will be the budget or the baseline.
Yep.
But then you got to leave room for an accelerated plan and then a more cautious plan, depending on how things, because I mean, setting a budget 12 months in advance is really hard right now. Really, really hard. And even priorities of the long term are hard. So no matter what, you got to leave psychologically room for your team to be more optimistic and to take that plan A, which is an accelerated plan if things go well, or drop into the more cautious plan if things aren't coming together like you think. And so instead of just having a plan and then a more defensive position, be ready to get more aggressive too, in terms of scenario. So that's a financial modeling scenario. And then there's all the different circumstances that could happen that would influence that. You have an interesting thought there, Brett. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me relay that back to you to make sure I'm understanding. So we've got the budget that the accountants have sent to us, which is last year plus 5%. But then we've got the accelerated plan, which might be last year plus 20%. And then we've got the cautious plan, which might be last year minus 10 or 20%. And
except for the version the accountant sent you part. The budget of the baseline is the one that you take the input from the accountants and then from the operators, and whatever you land on.
Yeah.
The point is having more flexibility in your budget. That's all.
And so are you thinking about what are the priorities in the A and the B and the C?
You could
20%.
You could, except for you can't predict a lot of this stuff, right? You can have some ideas depending on the business and how stable the business is.
Yeah.
But in a lot of the cases, that's why we reset priorities every quarter, because the priorities might change.
Yeah.
because
Okay.
it's so you're still aiming for your baseline or your budgeted number. That is what you're planning on. That's what your expenditures are on and everything else.
Yeah.
You might hold back on a bit of the hiring. Like you might almost operate your hiring or your capital expenditures on the C plan until you see if the B plan proves out or not.
Yeah.
But it's being open to different scenarios because it's just way harder to predict. Because if you want to tell me what's going to be happening and predict November of this year, and that would be very, very challenging. So it's leaving room up and room down.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. And that really plays into the question that we're talking about, how to effectively plan in this environment. How can we plan so that we can set the right priorities, so that we can align the team behind the right things? Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
Any
so we
other
had a couple
thoughts on that?
so basically, if there isn't a solution or isn't a vaccine, if this thing does come back, if the economy slips into a deep recession or depression, if the other scenario is if things bounce back, right? Or
Yeah.
there's a lot of these scenarios, and from all of that, you can come up with a more informed plan, but still you're going to have to be able to react and change.
Well, I keep thinking about how things changed in travel after 9/11. So I can remember
Yeah.
going back before that, I traveled to the States, and I was able over the Pacific to go up the front and sit with the pilots and have a chat to them, which was pretty cool in a huge
That seems
jumbo.
like forever ago.
Because it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But then after 9/11, we all have to go through security checks, and so many things, so many policies were implemented by immigration, by the government, by border security, by the airlines. And maybe that's kind of what we're talking about here, is that the world will keep going. There will still be consumption. There will be
Oh
still
yeah.
population growth. Things will continue to go, but there'll be just maybe different policies and processes as we move forward. So I suppose considering that as a scenario, not just, it'll be, I'm going to quote someone who's a leader who's quite famous and quite disliked. It'll be like magic. It'll go away. If who shall remain unnamed. If that, if we say, well, that's not going to happen, or that might not happen, moreover, there could be this other scenario, which is just more policies, more hoops to jump over. Okay, we'll still be able to continue to operate in that environment. Let's move forward.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the other companies I work with, they, and I wrote about this a couple weeks ago, but they have a huge surge in their business, but they're not sure it's going to last.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is they have their base financials, and then they have their COVID business financials, the other business that's just COVID. And even on their hiring, they have their base team, and they're looking at the people they're hiring because of COVID, and knowing that they could be more temporary roles in a permanent employment environment.
Yep.
So they're leaving themselves open. And this, by the way, this is why a lot of people do more outsourcing in this kind of an economy. Yeah. Because it gives you more scalability up and down. Even though you might pay more on an hourly basis, you buy flexibility. So higher price, but more ability to adjust because it's uncertain. So no matter what, I think in all of this, we're just trying to find ways that we can really be more flexible. We're still going to do our best to predict and think forward of what's possible, but just be prepared to have to adapt more than we normally would, like we have just experienced.
Yeah. All right. So what else have we got on the book today? We spoke about this. We're done.
Yeah. I mean, is there anything else we'd add around the planning?
I just wanted to close out. If we were our competition, how would we take ourselves out? Because I think that we went into that. But yeah, it's not just in these times. It's a tool that can be used regularly.
Yes,
and
always.
And I think, it talks about that, using that as a tool, but also, not just saying, let's get together and we'll do a SWOT, and then we'll figure out what are the big priorities for next year. There's so much more to it than that.
Yes. There's actual strategic questions. A SWOT is a baseline look at your business, and it doesn't evoke a ton of strategic thing. It's a starting point. So last thing I'll share is that on the CEO I talked with today, his business is doing well, but he is actually going to start his own little black ops team within his business to try, almost like in this, what do we got to do to take ourselves out?
Yeah.
He knows his team is running fast and linear and taking care of their clients. So he's got this little project. He's going to outsource some people somewhere. He's going to find a couple of people to work with him on it for a few months and try and prove out a new, simpler, better offering of what they do within their business. So he's actually, in many ways, going to try to take out his business within his business to help keep it fresh and innovative, because he's feeling some things are stale and he doesn't like it. And he also wants to crank up his marketing engine for the economy that he thinks he's going into. So
never
he's actually
waste a
going to act on
crisis.
exactly.
Sorry, never waste a crisis.
Yes.
He's going to act on it. So he's not wasting a crisis.
Nope, he's doing it. Awesome. Well, hey, you guys, thanks for listening, guys and gals. This has been the Growth Whisperers, and I'm here with my good friend Brad, and I'm Kevin. And for the video version, you can go find us on YouTube. And for Brad, I'll make sure I get this right, evolutionpartners.com.au. And to reach me, Kevin, it's lawrenceandco.com. So we hope you have an awesome week. I hope you continue to find ways to push ahead and keep that healthy dose of paranoia so that you and your team stay sharp and stay more competitive, and ideally continue to thrive as we move forward. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening. See ya.